Building a 300SL Gullwing, there are no how-to guides. There is no build manual. The best you can hope for is doing as much research as possible online, looking at previous builders to see how they've overcome certain fabrication issues, also looking at how those solutions could even be bettered. In this episode, I'm going to give you my own step-by-step how-to guide of how I've gone about fabricating the rear trunk area, the boot space. I want to share with you all of my thought processes so you can understand where I do actually arrive at the end of this episode. And I want this to form almost a benchmark that any future builds going forwards, you can look at what I've done and improve further still. So we end up just getting higher and higher quality builds of this car, which is what it deserves at the end of the day. I hope you enjoy this video. I really did enjoy the fabrication and everything involved in this one. So without further ado, I think we should make a start. Let's have a quick circle back to where I got to at the end of the last episode, and that was test fitting my bespoke fuel tank for the first time, just to make sure it fitted in between the SLK chassis rails. Proving that it was good to go, I was then able to get on with the next stage, and this is where we kick off from. So I'm really just taking my time just to think through all of the steps necessary that I have in my mind's eye to sort of implement this design that I want to put into the back of the car. So as a start, I've got the back of the boot cleaned up. I've got a piece of box just cut that you can see there and just held into place temporarily. I'm now going to go ahead and cut some extra side pieces and then also a piece that runs along the front here. And what that is going to do is provide me with a cradle to then seat the fuel tank into that. And that is the reason why I had the fuel tank designed with these perimeter flanges to allow it to sit down in this cradle. From there, I'll be able to finalize the lengths of the chassis rails. I left these long purposefully because I wanted to use those as extra structural support for this cradle that I'm making for the fuel tank. I know quite a lot of people do cut these right back to the inner arches, but that isn't something that I wanted to actually do. So I'm using the existing structure to my benefit. So I think that's what the next few stages are going to be. Let's get all the box cut, let's get it into place, possibly throw a couple of tacks on there and just start working this out. And again, not rushing anything, just making sure I'm going to end up in the place that I want to finish. Back over to the trusty old chop saw that's earning its keep at the moment. So with the remaining pieces of the fuel tank surround cut, heading back over to the car to get those put into place, making sure everything was square and level and true before just laying down a couple of tacks just to hold it into place, so then I can continue with the fabrication of the framework elsewhere. So things are shaping up really quite nicely. I've got the sidebars tacked in and the tank dropped back into place, and it fits perfectly and it's held really nice and securely. So the only other thing I really need to do at this stage is possibly drill just some holes in the flange through into the brackets just to cleco the tank into place, just so I know where I'm going to be installing my riv nuts, you know, further down the road. But what I have moved on to, and what you can see here, is the fact that I've started forming a framework along the backside of the fuel tank. Now, again, this isn't for crash protection as such, although there is that in mind when we get to the reinforcement bars. What I want to do is add some more structural rigidity to the hoop that runs around the back of the body. At the moment, as you know, it's only welded into place with the two outriggers that are on the side of the inner arch. What I want to take out is any possibility for any up and down flex that this tube has, because at the moment it's unsupported along a lot of its length. So Because triangles are incredibly strong, what I'm planning to do, and the reason I've created this box at the back of the tank, or this frame at the back of the tank, is I can get an angled piece of either box or tube work that angles up, that picks up on the hoop that runs around the perimeter. So that will take out any possibility of this hoop being able to drop or move downwards because it's being propped up by an upswept piece of bar, which will be fitted into these corners. Basically, I'm not going to be having any framework that if in the chance of a rear impact would instantly smash into the petrol tank and puncture it. All of my bracing is going to be deflecting off to the sides, keeping the fuel tank as protected as possible. Now, all of that will sort of start to make sense when I do dig into this. On top of the bars that are going to be coming up to pick up the rear bar, from the back side, and again, it will be difficult to see at the moment, I'm going to create another diagonal member that picks up, so it runs down the back here, so it completely locks this vertical member in place. So that adds some protection to the back of the car also. So what I'm going to do now, pop the tank out, get these bars tack welded into place, and then I can start looking at these triangulation pieces to start firming up the position of this rear bar. So I'm hoping all that makes sense. I think it's going to be quite a fairly elegant solution, and I'm excited to get some metal cut. Hopefully it fits as well as I want it to, and yeah, another step forwards. Getting the tank out the way so I could then measure up for this diagonal bracing that I wanted to cut. I've decided to do the bracing pieces in round bar, keeping the main structural pieces in square bar. Don't ask me why, I just like the idea of it. So I've got the tank out the way because I want to be getting on with the diagonal bracing, and here you can see the first member that I've got just held into place, and that triangulates this bottom portion of the framework. So if you can imagine this being triangulated, then I'm going to take another member from the bottom corner there, and that will run at an upwards angle and connect into the hoop that runs around the back of the body. And then I'm going to start putting in my horizontal bars to triangulate this member to give me the floor level that will run across this back side of the car. So it seems like it's going to work out. So I'm going to get this tacked into place. I'm going to get the second one cut for the other side, get that tacked into place, and then we can start moving on with the rest of it. It's thinking through things like this brace that really does give me a huge amount of satisfaction. Not having any experience of chassis design or fabrication before, just understanding the rudimentary principles of how something is or isn't strong, where it needs to be braced or where it doesn't need to be braced, and just trying to put my basic understanding of fabrication into place, that when I do manage to achieve something that looks correct, looks fit for purpose, and having the confidence that it is actually fit for purpose is just massively rewarding. So enthusiasm's high and progress has been really good. I thought I'd give you guys a break from time lapses of cutting box section and tack welding it into place. I just cracked on and got something done, and now I'm able to show you what I've been up to for the last hour or so, I suppose. So here you can see I've got the bottom round bar member tack welded into place. This is the angle piece that picks up the round bar that runs around the back of the body. And what you can see, what I've moved on to and held into place just temporarily at the moment, is this top square bar. Now this is setting the level of the boot floor that I'm going to be constructing very shortly. This member still adds a degree of triangulation, although for a true sort of belt and braces approach, I would have taken that up to the top of the petrol tank framing. But because I wanted to use this to set this boot floor level, this is why it's at the level it is. It's all been cut and bird's mouthed and ready to weld in. So after these are in, I can then start looking at the additional bracing that I'm going to incorporate into the center of the boot. So let's get these welded in and then we can move on to the other bits. I'll be the very first to admit that I am no welder. The welds that I can lay down, they are strong and they do penetrate the metal, so they do have the structural strength that is needed. I've just never really got to grips with laying down those really nice beads of aesthetically pleasing welds. So I'll probably run around all of this back end just with a flat disc, just taking out any high spots and blending in where needed. Obviously keeping the main meat in the weld, but just making them a little bit tidier before I then go ahead and prime and paint this chassis. So now I've got the floor side supports tacked into place on both sides. What I now need to do is turn my attention to how I'm going to give support to the floor in the middle of the boot area. What I've seen other builders do, and these are builds where they have kept the fuel tank in the existing location between the inner arches, is they have run a very simple bar from the center point of the rear hoop just through to their framing that they have sort of fabricated up. What I want to do and what I need to do is move away from that because of where the fuel tank is located. If I was to have that central bar, if I was to have any rear impact, it would just push that bar straight into the fuel tank, puncturing it, causing me a whole world of pain and possibly some fire. So what I'm going to do is introduce some diagonal bars that go from the center of the rear hoop, and they will go to the framing that I've got that surrounds the fuel tank. So there'll be one from there and then another one over in that direction. So should I ever have a rear impact, all of that force will go through to the framing and all of the triangulation and metalwork that I've got in these corners, and nothing going through directly to the tank. So it should save it getting punctured in the case of an accident. So that was my theory. It's what I'm going to work with. What I have actually done already is cut the pieces. I have got them bird's mouthed to the shape of the rear hoop. So what I can do now is get them into place and tack weld it up. I absolutely love it when a plan comes together, and I couldn't be happier with how these diagonal braces have turned out from sort of concept to then fabrication to now installation. This is exactly what I'd had in my mind's eye, as I keep saying time and time again. But it's things like this that, as I'd mentioned previously, that if it looks right, then it generally is right, and this just meets all of those criteria. So it was great to finally be at a stage just to get some initial tacks on these to get them held into place. So I've probably got another 5 or 6 hours put into the back of the car. So let me get you caught up in what has been going on. So on the face of it, maybe not so much, but in actual reality, I have been making decent progress. So I have started to weld the framework together, proper seam welds. You can see I've stitched along the top of the petrol tank framework there, and I have welded up and ground back the necessary pieces where the actual floor is going to sit. I've added this member along here, which runs around the side and returns back through to the rear hoop. What that allows me to do is create a shelf. you know, create a level for my boot floor pieces to now sit on, because before this angle was welded into place, it would have just been floating around in midair along that back side. So now I've created a full perimeter around the entire boot floor, which then, like I say, will allow me to start making some templates and then getting some sheet metal cut for the actual boot floor itself. So that is basically what I'm going to be getting onto now. I have got some, well, I don't use cardboard. I use wallpaper lining paper. So wall lining paper. It's much thicker than paper, but it's thinner than card. And for me, I just find it really perfect to get really lovely, accurate templates that I can then transfer to sheet metal. I used this method a lot when I was building the GT40, so it's something that I'm obviously going to carry through to the Gullwing. Let's crack on with that. Let's make some progress. I'll bring you along for the ride on this one, and then we can just see how it all starts shaping up. Patience is the absolute key when it comes to making these templates. The more time, care and attention you put into the accuracy of this template, the easier your life will be once you transfer it onto the metal. Once I cut it out, it needed a very, very small amount of fine tuning before that first four piece dropped into place. I then jumped into the side pieces. They were slightly more complicated, so piece by piece, I slowly started to get everything necessary to line out this boot floor. As mentioned, the sides were slightly more tricky, so they did need a little bit more fine tuning just to make sure they followed that perimeter of the body really nicely, and so they sat down equally as well on that angled section perimeter that I'd put into place to support the back edge of the floor. So we're starting to make massive inroads into this whole project at the back of the car. This piece you can see that I've moved on to is the return up stand from the boot floor up to the line of the petrol tank. My folder is nowhere near that size, so all I could do was get it clamped down to a really nice thick piece of heavy duty steel and then just hammer in that edge, starting to work it over to give it that 90-degree bend that I needed. And you'll see how that sort of fits in and around the other boot floor pieces very shortly. As I'm sure you all know, that when you hammer on metal, you do end up stretching it to a certain degree. So what you can see me doing here is with my shrinker tool, just running along that folded edge, just giving it a tweak back with the shrinker, just to pull that piece back into absolute perfect straightness. It just saves you trying to fight it into position when it's in the car prior to welding. With that piece worked to a stage that was suitable for an initial trial fit, just got the side pieces popped back in, and here you can see that piece that I've just made with the return lip that sits down on that angled channel, and that then basically allows that main boot floor section to come in and sit over the lot, and when that's welded and sealed, it will provide me with a complete watertight edge detail around the perimeter of the boot floor. Let's have a little check-in, because we're getting to the stage where I can start working in some nice detail. So I've got all three pieces, well, all four pieces, including the upstand section, into place. Now, at the moment, the side panels overlap. So this side panel is higher than the main panel of the boot. What I actually want to do is put a swage line into this piece. So it will basically step up, if you can imagine that, and then the side piece runs in. So this will all end up being flush. I just want this to be sort of one seamless level. I have made the actual floor out of 1.2mm steel, which is pretty robust, but I may add a couple of bead lines just running along that panel just to add some more detail into it as well. but I will see how that one shapes up. So I'm going to get these swage lines put in along there and one on the other side, and then just start going from there, just doing some fine tweaking to get this thing fitted perfectly. I bought this bead roller when I built the GT40 for this specific purpose. The GT40 chassis was clad in hand-formed aluminium panels, and there were a lot of instances where two panels I wanted to have overlapping, so it created that sort of flush run through of the panel line. So once that was done, I decided that I did want to have a bead rolled finish to the center of the boot floor. So I swapped over the dies, carried out a couple practice runs, just knowing how much pressure to put onto the die to get that panel formed to the shape that I wanted it to without adding unwanted distortion. And when I was happy, I drew my design onto the main panel. I went for just a very basic cross. It adds in some nice rigidity. Just taking my time, running the panel through, keeping the lines as straight as I could possibly get them, making sure that die profile was picked up nicely in the piece of metal as I ran it through the machine. As well as getting the boot floor panels finished up, I've also been forcing myself to get the final welding done to the necessary areas in the back of the car so I can get the actual boot floor welded into position. So what I've got here is, it looks fairly similar than it did the last time we sort of checked in, but I have got the top side of all of the members welded out. I have crawled around underneath to a certain extent and done the welding on the underside. There are a few areas that will be finally welded up when the body does drop off, but I'm now in a position to get some weld through primer on the top side of all of these members, because I just want to belt and braces this. So I do want to give this as much rust resistance as absolutely possible. So I'm going to get everything cleaned up, get it wiped down, get some weld through primer onto all of these parts, so then I can get the boot floor sections into place, get some plug well holes drilled, and yeah, just start finalizing and finishing up this whole area. So it's all coming together really quite nicely. Before I could break out the welder, I needed to get these panels prepped and ready for installation. I wanted to prime any surfaces that would now be sandwiched between another piece of metal. I really do want to give this car the best chance of a good life going forward. So I'm treating all bare metal surfaces with a zinc primer or a weld through primer where necessary, and all of these panels are no different. So first of all, I got the DA out and gave the panels a good going over, giving them a key in preparation for the primer, getting them wiped down and free from any grease. Getting the frame primed, so then finally I can get all of the panels fitted, clamped into place before getting the welder out and getting these panels into place for the very last time. Patience is the key, just making sure that everything is clamped down and pulled down as much as it needs to be, so when you do lay down that plug weld, it does fuse everything together perfectly as it needs to be. It was a long old process, and in a perverse way, extremely enjoyable, just to see everything come together. All the plug welds laid down really beautifully, excellent penetration, and it just really started to make this boot floor feel absolutely solid. Plenty of time went into the dressing of the welds. Thankfully, it didn't need too much, but this is just in readiness for, you know, the final paint stage, and then finally all of this boot floor will be sound deadened before carpeting, but obviously that is way into the future. So after a massive tidy up in the garage, I dropped the tank back into place before standing back to admire my handiwork. When you take on a project like this and you tackle a particular area of the build, such as building out the back of this car, you obviously go into it with a picture of how you want it to end up. But it's not until you actually get to the end and you can stand there and look at what you've made, can you ever really appreciate and decide whether it was a success. Now, for me, not really having a vast amount of experience of scratch build fabrication, you know, I really did take my time and probably way overthink the work was necessary and involved to end up where I have ended up. There are still some minor finishing works that I will do when the body comes off. I need to weld the perimeter of the boot floor to the tubular hoop that runs around the back of the body. I could have done it laying underneath the car, but it will just enable me to make a much cleaner job with the body out of the way. Seeing the tank sat down in its frame and having that panned out exactly as I wanted was a massive relief, in all honesty, because as you know, I'd had this tank bespoke made by JSH Fabrication, so it had to work. To have it sat like this, I'm really, really happy. And now I can sort of carry on with the next stage of the process when I get back onto the boot floor, which will be positioning the battery, getting the air compressor, getting the air tank either mounted in either side, or possibly looking at putting it underneath the car just for maximum boot space. Now, the actual rear space itself is huge, and I do want to have nothing on show here other than just a beautifully trimmed out, you know, boot area. So I'm looking forward to hiding absolutely everything. So moving on to the next stage of work, and I have got a ton of roll cage tube on order, which I'm just waiting to turn up. I need to get my tube bender assembled that I've bought, get it situated in the garage, start measuring up for a roll cage that I've never ever built. So that's going to be a huge learning curve, which is no doubt going to take me 10 times longer than it would anyone else. But you know, it's all part of the fun, it's all part of the journey, and it's all the part of, you know, building one of these cars and just teaching yourself new skills and seeing it all come together in the end. So the next episode is going to be hopefully a big one. I'm looking forward to it, as I hope you guys are too. So up until that next one, I'll catch you next time.